Hey guys, tonight we travel back to the Middle Ages, where the kitchen is more of a hazard zone than a place to satisfy your midnight cravings. You're stepping into a world of crumbly bread, suspicious stews, and a constant undercurrent of, what exactly am I eating? The air is thick with the aroma of wood smoke and something sour you can't quite place, and every bite is a gamble. You probably won't survive this, not with your delicate modern stomach. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge across a muddy courtyard, your breath fogging the air as you step inside a medieval hall. Here, bread is life, but it's not the pillowy loaf you might dream of. It's hard as a rock and dark as a storm cloud, thanks to a hearty dose of rye or barley. In the flour, let's just say it's seen better days, sometimes laced with ground beans or peas to stretch the dough, other times crawling with a bit of extra protein in the form of weevils. You sit by the fire, peering into a cauldron of murky stew. It's thick and lumpy, and you're not sure if that's a good thing. The stews here, called pottage, are a daily affair meant to be filling, never fancy. Whatever scraps the cook finds, bits of dried meat, old root vegetables, a few handfuls of dried peas all go in. Today, you're lucky enough to see a sliver of bacon in the mix. Or maybe it's just a particularly fatty root. Hard to say in the flickering light. Historians still argue whether medieval bread was truly as dangerous as some records suggest. There are tales of bread so rough, it cut gums, and of ergot-infected rye causing hallucinations. But tonight, you're certain your teeth are going to feel every gritty bite. You tear off a chunk of this bread, which tastes sour and faintly moldy. It's a testament to the brewing yeast and the questionable storage methods of the time. The tang isn't from some artisan fermentation technique, it's just the flavor of flour that's been stored in a damp mill for too long. And the stew, it's got a depth of flavor that hints at, well, let's call it earthiness. A polite way to say the meat is probably halfway to rancid. A fringe tidbit for you. Some medieval cooks believed that adding a handful of ground nutshells to their bread gave it a longer shelf life. So tonight, you're also crunching on bits of oak and walnut shell, like a squirrel at a dinner party. You pause to take in the scene, the rushes on the floor, reek of stale ale and smoke, and the kitchen dog nosing your foot doesn't seem too picky about where dinner ends up. You're trying to keep it together, but there's a lingering taste of metal on your tongue from the old iron pot, and the stale air doesn't help. The cook cackles in the corner, adding a ladleful of mystery stew to your bowl. You're told it's good for you, full of hearty grains and earthy flavors, but your stomach already churns at the thought. As you chew, you wonder how anyone survived on this daily gruel, but necessity was a powerful motivator. You think of how modern food safety labels would shudder at the sight of this kitchen. The bread's rough texture cuts your gums a bit, and you make a mental note that even in the 21st century, you've never experienced bread that fights back. A few bites in, you're grateful for the liquid in the stew, even if it's slightly slimy. You pretend not to notice the odd gray fleck that might have been meat once, or maybe a mushroom. Your host laughs, offering you a sliver of something smoked, maybe boar, maybe goat. It's tough and salty, and as you chew, the flavors burst through, intense, meaty, and borderline overpowering. You're told it was preserved over the hearth for weeks, gathering the tang of wood smoke and the faint bite of mold. Delicious, they say. Deadly, you think. The fire crackles as you shift uncomfortably. You notice the pot has a greasy sheen that doesn't inspire much confidence, and you're right to worry animal fats congeal in strange ways. Still, it's a warm meal, and you're in no position to turn it down. Besides, in this world, even moldy bread is a luxury some go to bed with nothing but a gnawing hunger. A young scullion lad ladles another portion into your bowl, and you thank him politely. He's missing a few teeth, and you think he's probably seen more stomach-turning dishes than you have. You manage a weak smile, though the back of your throat itches with the sourness of that bread. The wind howls outside, and you tuck your cloak closer around you. In this world of endless stews and questionable bread, you're learning to appreciate even the smallest comforts. A fire, a hard crust to gnaw on, a few moments of quiet as the pot bubbles on. But as you sit back, you can't help but wonder, what's worse, the constant chewing or the inevitable trip to the privy later? You're about to find out. After all, medieval bread and stews were meant to fill you up, not necessarily to keep you well. So let's keep trudging on, you've still got a long medieval night ahead. You lean back from the smoky cauldron, your gut already gurgling in protest, but there's no pause in sight. Around you, the feast of grains continues a never-ending carousel of porridge, gruel, and endless variations on a theme. You're discovering that if you're a medieval peasant, grains are your lifeline. Barley, rye, and oats form the backbone of every meal, ground into bread, boiled into mush, or sprinkled into stews. Historians still argue whether the medieval diet was more healthful or harmful. Some say these grains offered vital nutrients and fiber, while others suggest the lack of diversity left bodies starved for real balance. Tonight, as you spoon another ladle of gritty porridge into your mouth, you're convinced your stomach is already waving the white flag. This is the medieval food pyramid in action, a sturdy base of grains with a few miserly additions. You glance down at the porridge's gloppy surface, noting the odd bit of green, some kind of dried herb, or maybe just something the wind blew in. The line between garnish and contamination is always blurry here. The bread, if you're lucky enough to have it, is sour and dense. Each bite feels like you're chewing on a history lesson. These loaves were meant to last days, sometimes weeks. There's no supermarket for fresh loaves, just a communal bakehouse where you might find your bread swapped for someone else's if you're not careful. As you trudge through another mouthful, you notice the fishy smell wafting from the table. Saltfish, a medieval staple, has made an appearance, festive and slightly metallic in scent. It's been dried to the point of near immortality. It's a cheap protein, easy to store, and a nightmare for your digestion. But if you're poor, it's the only fish you'll see until the next feast day. The gritty bread, the bland mush, the salted fish. It's a meal that would send most modern diners running. But in the Middle Ages, it's your daily fare. And though you're missing the crunch of fresh vegetables or the bite of citrus, you're stuck with what's here. Endless grains and the occasional bone to gnaw. The cook slams another bowl of barley gruel in front of you, muttering that it's good for the bowels. You're not sure if he's joking, but you'll find out soon enough. And there's the fringe tidbit of the days medieval cooks believed that barley could help stave off melancholy. So, you're chewing your way to better moods, though your taste buds are sulking. You glance around and see a few noble folk in the distance, dining at a table piled with finer grains white bread, sweetened spelt, porridge, dishes you'd kill for. The class divide is as sharp as your bread knife. For you, it's cracked barley and stale rye. For them, it's soft wheat, sweet butter, and creamy dishes so rich they'd make your stomach weep with joy. The cook's assistant shuffles by, adding a pinch of salt to your mush. It's a rare treat. Salt was a luxury in medieval kitchens, worth its weight in silver in some regions. You're grateful for the added flavor, even if the salt tastes a bit like the bottom of a barrel. You try to chew slower, but there's no real relief in this meal. Every bite is a test of your resolve. And here's a little joke to keep your spirits up. In medieval times, they said you could find a grain of sand in your bread faster than a grain of salt. You're beginning to believe it. You remember the mention of questionable water back in the hall. Here, you're avoiding water altogether too risky, too full of invisible threats. Instead, you're offered weak ale, thin and sour, but safer than any well or river. You sip cautiously, grimacing at the vinegary tang. It's meant to fill you up, but it only seems to swirl the grains around in your gut. A sudden commotion by the Ferrero pot has spilled, sending a slurry of barley and pea mush slithering across the floor. The scullion scrambles to scrape it back up, unconcerned about a bit of ash or straw mixed in. Waste not, want not, especially when every grain counts. The talk around the table turns to how lucky you are to even have this much. In winter, grains could run out, leaving only chestnuts and dried peas to gnaw on. You shiver at the thought of a meal made entirely of chestnuts. Your teeth already ache in sympathy. Still, there's something comforting about the simplicity of these meals if you squint past the lumps and the aftertaste. Every bowl is a promise that you'll make it through another day, even if your gut might not thank you later. You scrape the last of the gruel from the bowl, feeling the rough wooden spoon scrape your tongue. Tomorrow, You'll eat more of the same, maybe with a bit of turnip or onion if the garden's generous. But tonight, you're just trying to keep it down, your mind wandering to the feasts of kings and queens while your own belly braces for what's next. A final swallow of ale, a sigh that rattles in your chest. Your stomach's already plotting its revenge, but you're not done yet. There's more medieval mischief on the menu, and your gut has no choice but to keep going. You swallow the last gritty bite of barley mush, but there's no time to dwell on the aftertaste. Tonight's meal is far from over. A hush falls over the hall as a boar's head, eyes still glistening in the flickering firelight, is carried in on a battered wooden platter. You blink twice, unsure if you're seeing a feast or a horror show. This is no simple supper, it's a medieval banquet, where the rich flaunt their power in extravagant dishes. The boar's head is crusted with herbs and roasted until the skin crackles, the snout propped open with a lemon that's traveled hundreds of miles. And you're just hoping the meat is less tough than the bread you've been gnawing on. Historians still argue whether these feasts were truly about taste or just a way to show off wealth and status. Judging by the heavy gold goblets and the fat candles dripping wax on the table, you're guessing it's the latter. You edge closer to the table, your stomach growling in curiosity, though part of you would rather pass on the boar's bulging eyes. A nobleman in a velvet robe slices off a hunk of meat, thick with fat and glistening with the cook's best attempt at a glaze. He slides it onto your wooden trinchera flat piece of stale bread, doubling as a plate and winks. "Enjoy," he says, as if you're not already worried about your gut's ability to handle this fatty onslaught. The first bite is a shock. Smoky, salty, and so rich your mouth can't decide whether to cheer or gag. The grease coats your lips, and you realize that in this world, fat is flavor and also a ticket to hours of indigestion. But you keep chewing, because who knows when you'll see meat like this again. The table is laden with mystery, pie, some sweet, some savory, all cloaked in a thick crust that hides the filling like a medieval game of guess what's inside. You cut into one, and a heady steam wafts up. Minced meat, prunes, and a sprinkle of cloves so pungent it tickles your nose. It's a flavor bomb, and your stomach is already ringing the alarm bells. The fringe tidbit of the night. Some medieval pies were made with live birds stuffed inside, 4 and 20 blackbirds baked in a pie. Wasn't just a nursery rhyme. Tonight, you're spared that particular surprise, but the idea alone makes you chew a bit more carefully. A jester tumbles by, juggling apples, his bells jingling in the smoky air. He grins at you, winking as he plucks an apple from the air and tosses it onto your plate. It's a rare treat fruit in the dead of winter, and a welcome break from the meat and grain monotony. You sink your teeth in, the sweet tang, a tiny oasis of relief. As the feast roars on, you catch snippets of conversation about Spice's black pepper worth its weight in gold, cinnamon prized above all. It's all here, scattered across the meats and pies like a medieval flex. You taste it in the boar's head, in the mystery pea spices used not just for flavor, but to mask the questionable freshness of the meat. You're beginning to realize that medieval banquets are a test of endurance as much as a display of wealth. The noise, the smells, the sheer weight of the food, it's enough to make you dream of a simple green salad, though you'd never find that here. You take another bite of boar, the meat tough but smoky, the fat so rich it coats your throat. Your modern gut is whimpering, but you push on, because this is a rare glimpse into the feasting halls of the past. The flickering light dances on the greasy platters, and you imagine the lords and ladies of the castle, their bellies full and their heads swimming with strong ale. The cook's ladle clangs against the pot as he stirs a bubbling sauce thick with wine, tart with vinegar, and laced with a handful of mystery herbs. He pours it over the boar's head with a flourish, and you're not sure if it's meant to improve the taste or just hide the sins of the kitchen. You pause for a moment, thinking of all those who didn't have a place at this table. Outside these walls, most people scrape by on bread and onions. This banquet is as rare as a shooting star. And though your stomach's already considering mutiny, you can't help but marvel at the sheer audacity of it all. As the night winds on, the room grows hotter, the fire crackling louder as the jester's bells jangle in the smoky air. You feel a bead of sweat on your brow, your head swimming with a heady mix of spices and smoke. The final bite of boar slides down your throat like a stone, and you let out a breath you didn't know you were holding. The feast may be a show of power and plenty, But for your gut, it's a battle it's not sure it can win. Still, you're in this medieval kitchen. For the long haul, there's much more to taste, chew, and endure before the night is through. You lean back, your stomach heavy with the rich fatty boar's head, but the feast doesn't stop there. Next up is the humble yet treacherous world of medieval cheese. It arrives on a wooden board, crumbly, pungent, and slightly green around the edges. You swallow hard, because here, cheese isn't the safe haven you might hope for. Medieval cheese is a gamble. Some of it is fresh, tangy, and crumbly like a young sheep's milk cheese that's alive with flavor. But more often, it's been aged in damp cellars that double as rodent playgrounds. Aged for months or even years, this cheese can range from rock hard to weepy and blue-veined, depending on the luck of the cellar. Historians still argue whether these medieval cheeses were truly delicious or just a way to preserve milk that would otherwise spoil. But tonight, as you take a tentative nibble, your modern stomach is leaning toward the latter. The first bite is sharp, a tang that zips straight to your sinuses. The texture is crumbly but oddly creamy in the center, and you can't quite decide if it's genius or a disaster. The aftertaste is intense, like milk's last, defiant stand before decay. You chew carefully, reminding yourself that this cheese is the real deal. No pasteurization, no modern safety standards, just raw milk and time. A French tidbit for tonight. Some medieval households believed that cheese should be cut only with a special knife to keep it from going bad. Tonight, you're using whatever blade's at hand, so you're probably already doomed. The cheese is served alongside bread that's seen better day charred and stale, perfect for sopping up the runny bits. You're told it's the best way to eat it, but your teeth ache at the thought. Still, you press on, because here, cheese is a source of pride, a sign that your cows or goats have survived the lean months. You glance around at the other diners, noting how they tuck in with gusto. Cheese is more than food, it's a sign that you're making it through another winter. You chew, slowly, feeling the tangy bite bloom on your tongue. The smell is powerful, earthy, almost barnyard funky, and you remind yourself that back then, this was normal. A wheel of cheese could last a family weeks, if it didn't grow too wild with mold. And while some molds were harmless, others were a stomach-turning mystery. The cook bustles past, offering you a slice of a harder, more aged cheese, sharp and nutty, almost crystalline in texture. It's a relief after the runny stuff, though it still carries a pungent edge. You can almost imagine the monks in distant monasteries, stirring vats of milk in the cool stone dairies, perfecting these ancient wheels of dairy alchemy. A few bites in, you realize the richness of the cheese is both a blessing and a curse. It's dense, filling, and just a little bit suspect. You chase it down with a sip of weak ale, grateful for anything to wash down the barnyard notes lingering on your tongue. Outside, the wind rattles the wooden shutters, and you huddle closer to the fire. The air is heavy with the smell of smoke, old wood, and the sharp tang of dairy gone rogue. You imagine the dairymaids in the early morning, skimming milk in cold, dark barns, the smell of hay and cows clinging to everything. The talk around the table turns to trade how wheels of cheese traveled across kingdoms, how the rich paid extra for fancy imports while peasants made do with crumbly local rounds. You think of the markets buzzing with the tang of brine and sour milk, the barrels of curds packed in salt and straw. Another bite of the softer cheese, and you're starting to wonder if your gut can handle the wild bacterial party in your belly. The medieval kitchen might not know the word probiotics, but you're definitely getting a crash course. You pause, a small joke flickering in your head. Imagine telling your stomach, "Don't worry, it's just good bacteria," and your stomach replying, "That's what they all say." You chew a final bite, the richness coating your tongue like a wool blanket. The hall is loud with laughter and the clatter of knives, and for a moment, you let yourself believe that this is a feast for the ages, even if your gut's not sure how to handle it. The candles flicker, casting long shadows over the wooden beams. You glance at the last wedge of cheese, a deep golden wheel that smells of old cellars and summer pastures. One last nibble, and you're done for now. But you're learning something important here. In the Middle Ages, food wasn't just fuel, it was survival, community, and a daily adventure in gut fortitude. And your gut? Well, it's hanging in there for now. The fire crackles low, and your belly already feels like a brewing storm. But there's no rest for the weary. Next up is the sweet, heady world of medieval drinks. You're handed a wooden cup of honeyed ale, warm from the hearth and foamy at the top. A sip, and your mouth is flooded with a syrupy sweetness that masks the stale bitterness underneath. Honey, ale, and a touch of mead, this is the medieval drink trio. Historians still argue whether these drinks were brewed to mask bad water or simply because life was better with a buzz. Either way, you're about to find out just how treacherous these medieval brews can be. The honeyed ale slides down your throat with deceptive smoothness, but the sweetness can't fully hide the harsh, almost vinegary tang. Medieval brewing was no precision, craft ale was made fast, with wild yeast that gave it a sour, unpredictable edge. You can practically taste the wooden barrels it's been stored in, the hints of smoke and age that cling to every sip. Mead, that golden drink of honey and water, comes next. It's richer, smoother, and it tastes like summer in a cup until you remember that the honey hides a potent punch. You're told mead is good for what ails you, and in a world where the water could kill you, it's the lesser of two evils. Still, your modern gut is already wondering how it's going to fare with a bellyful of curdled cheese and boar's head. A fringe tidbit for you. Some medieval drinkers believed mead had magical properties, especially if it was brewed under a full moon. Tonight, you're not sure if it's magic or just the warm flush of alcohol in your cheeks. You glance around the smoky hall, noticing the men and women already swaying a bit as they drink. It's a rough night ahead for your digestion, but here, drinking is as much about survival as it is about celebration. Ale and mead are safer than water-boiled, fermented, and alive with yeast. You sip carefully, trying not to think too hard about what's floating in the cup. Your host claps you on the back, urging you to drink deep. Good for the soul, he says, though your stomach begs to differ. You take another sip, the sweetness sticking to your teeth, and try to focus on the music in the background, a lone piper playing a mournful tune that weaves through the raucous laughter. The ale tastes different with every mouthful, sometimes too sour, other times too sweet. There's no consistency here, no modern recipes with measured hops and balanced flavors. Every batch is an experiment, a gamble your gut is forced to play along with. You laugh quietly at a small joke, imagine telling your friends back home that you're drinking medieval beer for the health benefits. Your gut's already drafting a complaint letter. As the night stretches on, the mead loosens your limbs. The worries of the harsh bread and the questionable cheese fade in a haze of sweet, boozy warmth. But you know the morning will be another story, a pounding head and a gut that's staging a full medieval revolt. You swirl the ale in your cup, watching the foam settle in slow ripples. You can almost see the centuries of history swirling in there, toothed farmers who grew the grains, the brewers who tended the casks, the monks who perfected the mead recipes. You're drinking more than just ale tonight, you're tasting a piece of medieval life, one sip at a time. The cook passes by, muttering about how the last batch of mead turned sour and the burrell no surprise there, in a world without modern sanitation. You nod, feeling the warm flush on your cheeks and the slight blur in your vision. Maybe that's why everyone's so merry tonight, better to drink and laugh than dwell on the moldy bread and the questionable meats. You take another mouthful of mead, feeling the sweet honey coat your tongue. The taste is rich, almost floral, and it lingers longer than you like. You think of how rare honey was a luxury that meant someone kept bees in straw hives out back, braving stings for this golden treat. The hall is louder now, the air thick with the smell of smoke and sweat and roasted meat. Your gut is doing slow somersaults, but you're too caught up in the warmth of the fire and the laughter of your table mates to care for now. A final swallow of ale, the cup clattering on the wooden table. Your stomach protests, but the mead's magic makes you shrug it off. After all, you're just getting started on this medieval food journey. And who knows what other drinks are lurking in the barrels out back. For tonight, you're caught in the golden glow of honeyed ale and the crackling fire. Your gut waging a silent battle even as your heart soars with the music. Sleep is far off, but so is sobriety in the Middle Ages. That's just how you survived. Your head's swimming with the warmth of mead, but your gut has no time to rest. The next course arrives, steaming and earthy. A bowl of pulses and peas, mashed into a thick, brownish paste that smells of damp earth and smoky firewood. Welcome to the plague of peas and lentils, your medieval gut's closest companion, whether you like it or not. This is the stuff of medieval peasant dreams: cheap, filling, and easy to grow in the rocky soil of a cold medieval farm. Historians still argue whether these pulses saved lives during famine or simply padded out bellies already stretched thin. But tonight, as you scoop up the mush with a hard crust of bread, you're less worried about history and more about the slow, creeping gas that's already starting to bubble. You lean in, taking a careful bite. The flavor is, well, let's call it humble. There's a hint of onion, maybe a wisp of garlic if you're lucky, but mostly it's just a dull, vegetal taste that clings to your tongue like a wet blanket. A fringe tidbit for you. Some medieval cooks believed that if you sang to your pot of peas, it would cook more tenderly. You hum a note under your breath, half joking, half hoping your gut might thank you later. You glance around the hall, watching the other diners dig in with surprising gusto. For them, this is a meal that sticks to the ribs better than empty bellies, even if it means a night of gurgles and questionable noises. You shift in your seat, feeling the first stirrings of medieval flatulence, and remind yourself that in a world without modern plumbing, everyone's in the same boat. The cook ladles out another portion, and you marvel at the sheer weight of the dish, thick enough to stand a spoon in and nearly as dense as your growing discomfort. You take a slow, resigned bite, chewing the earthy mush that was once a tiny green pea dreaming of spring sunshine. You try to distract yourself with the music in the background. Someone's playing a lute, plucking out a melancholy tune that drifts through the smoky air. You let it wash over you, even as your gut insists on making its own percussion section in return. The wind rattles the wooden shutters, and you huddle closer to the fire. The warmth does nothing to settle the rising storm in your belly, but you're starting to see why peas were such a staple. They're cheap, they're filling, and they're a meal that could carry you through the leanest times. You take another bite, trying not to dwell on the gritty texture. It's not bad, exactly, but it's not good. Either just a steady, plodding march of mush that fills you up without ever really satisfying. Your gut's not impressed, but your body's grateful for the calories. Someone jokes about the bean song, the old medieval jingle about how peas and beans make the music of the night. You force a smile, clutching your belly and hoping your own chorus stays discreet. In this crowded hall, privacy's a luxury no one has. You glance at the pot by the fire, bubbling away with more of the same mush. You're told it's called pease pottage, and you wonder how many peas it takes to keep a peasant alive through winter. You think of the endless fields of green, the women bent double at harvest, the clatter of wooden bowls at mealtime. The air grows thick with the scent of cooked legumes, earthy and almost sweet in the smoky haze. You take another bite, your jaw working like a medieval millstone, and let the warmth of the stew settle in your belly, though you know the real fireworks are yet to come. You pause, another joke flickering through your mind. If medieval peasants had known about gas masks, they'd have made one just for nights like this. Your gut rumbles in agreement, and you glance around, grateful for the low firelight that hides the slight flush on your cheeks. The pottage isn't glamorous, but it's the backbone of a medieval kitchen. It's a testament to survival, how a handful of humble pulses could feed a family, how a pot of mush could stretch to fill every hungry mouth in the hall. You swallow the last mouthful, your gut letting out a quiet protest, and push the bowl away. The loop music fades, the fire crackles, and you let out a long breath, half relief, half anticipation for what's still to come. Tonight, you're discovering the real medieval miracle. How these simple meals, humble as they are, could keep a peasant on their feet, day after day. Even if your gut's already plotting a full-scale rebellion, you push back your empty bowl of peas pottage, your gut already protesting in a slow, ominous rumble. But the medieval kitchen shows no mercy. It's time to tackle the mysteries of roasting and rotting, that fine line every medieval cook had to dance. The cook at the hearth is turning a spit, and the smell of roasting meat fills the smoky hall. It's a heady mix of crackling fat and singed hair, and you swallow hard, your mouth watering despite your uneasy belly. This is where meat preservation met its most creative and sometimes most questionable art. A slab of pork hangs from a hook, glistening with smoke and the faint tang of salt. You watch the cook baste it with a brush of rosemary and animal fat, the sizzling juices dripping into the fire below. It smells glorious, and for a moment, you almost forget how your gut's still trying to process that last helping of peas. Historians still argue whether medieval smoking and salting actually worked as well as people thought. Some say it was just enough to get by, others think it barely slowed the rot. You're about to find out firsthand. A hunk of this roasted pork lands on your trencher, and you take a careful bite. The outside is smoky, almost caramelized, but the inside, well, let's just say there's a fine line between aged and over the hill. The meat is chewy, dense with salt, and the flavor is deep, like the forest floor on a damp day. A fringe tidbit for you. Some medieval folk believed that if you rubbed meat with ashes, it would last longer. Tonight, you're just hoping the fire's done enough to keep things safe. You chew slowly, each bite a dense, smoky meditation. The cook beams at you, proud of his work. This isn't just dinner, it's a testament to centuries-old survival skills. Smoking, salting, drying it was all a race against time, trying to outpace decay in a world without refrigeration. You sip some ale to wash it down, grateful for the thin, sour liquid even as it churns the mix of pulses and pork in your belly. The hall's air is thick with the scent of wood smoke and animal fat, and you find yourself almost hypnotized by the flicker of the firelight. The cook's helper brings out a slab of something tougher jerky, they call it. Strips of dried beef so hard you could probably hammer nails with them. You break off a piece, working it like a piece of medieval chewing gum, the salty tang exploding in your mouth with every chew. The texture is punishing, but it's protein that would last weeks or even months stuck away in a pouch, carried on long journeys or through harsh winters. You think of medieval soldiers, gnawing on these strips of meat as they trudge through muddy fields and frozen forests. A sudden pop from the fire, and a wave of smoke rolls over you. You cough, eyes watering, and glance around at the other diners. No one seems to mind. They're used to it, to the taste of smoke and the crackle of fat, to the dance of preservation and decay that defines every meal. The meat is filling, but it's also a heavy weight in your gut, and you can feel the strain of so many rough, smoky flavors. Still, there's no denying the comfort in that rich, primal taste, smoke and salt, and the faint whiff of survival. You pause, a small joke bubbling up. Imagine explaining to your gut that tonight's menu was designed to last weeks. Your gut, of course, would rather you didn't. You take another bite of the jerky, wincing at the hardness of it, but savoring the deep, savory taste. This is medieval trail food, meant to keep you moving through hard days and cold nights. And though your belly's already full, you can't help but respect the sheer determination it took to make sure this meat didn't end up as compost. The cook, wiping sweat from his brow, gestures to a bubbling pot of pottage that's taken on a meatier aroma. He drops in a few scraps of smoked pork, letting the flavors meld in a way that's both hearty and suspicious. You wonder how many days this pottage has been simmering some pots, you're told. Never really empty, just topped up day after day, year after year. You take a careful spoonful, tasting the depth of the broth, smoky, a little sour, and thick with the memories of meals long past. You're tasting centuries of survival in every bite, and your gut, well, it's along for the ride whether it likes it or not. The fire crackles, the smell of smoke and meat heavy in the air. You lean back, feeling the weight of medieval preservation settle deep in your bones. Outside, the wind howls, but in here, the world is all smoke and fat, and the stubborn will to keep going, no matter what. You lean back in your chair, your gut working overtime as the cook brings out yet another dish, a slab of butter so yellow it looks like it's been sunbathing, and a bowl of suet that glistens in the candlelight. Rancid butter and suet secrets, your gut's newest nightmare, ready to dance in your belly. Butter, in the medieval world, is more than just a creamy spread. It's a test of how long you can keep milk from turning on you. Historians still argue whether medieval butter was always rancid or whether it was more a question of storage. But tonight, there's no argument. This butter's gone past creamy and straight into sour. You take a cautious sniff. There's a bite to it, a tang that hits the back of your throat. The cook grins, urging you to smear it thick on a crust of bread. "It'll put hair on your chest," he says with a wink. You're pretty sure it'll just put your gut in an early grave, but you take a small bite anyway. The taste is sharp, almost cheesy, with an oily slickness that coats your tongue. It's not exactly pleasant, but it's fueling in the Middle Ages. That's what matters. Butter was precious, churned by hand from milk that might already be a few days old, and used in everything from bread to pottage to pie crust. Next up is a sueta block of pure white animal fat, prized for its ability to last through the winter months. The cook slices off a piece, dropping it into a bubbling pot of stew. You watch it melt, turning the broth into a shimmering, greasy pool. It's the kind of rich, heavy flavor that medieval kitchens loved, and that your gut's about to have strong opinions on. A fringe tidbit for tonight: some medieval cooks believed that suet was the secret to a long life, especially when mixed with herbs like sage and rosemary. You're not sure about the long life part, but it's definitely the secret to a long night of belly aching. You take a spoonful of the suet-laced pottage, feeling the silky, fatty broth coat your mouth. It's intense. The flavor is deep and meaty, but there's no escaping the slick sheen that slides down your throat, leaving a heavy warmth in its wake. You're starting to understand why medieval folk prize fat so much. Its energy, and in a world of endless labor, every bite counts. The cook laughs, telling you how suet isn't just for stew sits, for pie crust too. Medieval pastry was a far cry from the flaky, tender crusts. These were tough, greasy shells meant to keep meat fresh, not melt in your mouth. You can taste that in every bite, the suet giving the crust a dense, almost chewy texture. You manage another bite of bread and butter, your teeth sinking through the hard crust and into the slick, sour fat. It's filling, but it's also, let's call it, an acquired taste. Your gut is already staging protest, but you're trying to focus on the way the flavors blend with the smoky air and the flicker of the fire. The talk around the table turns to how butter was Medea process that involved hours of churning, often done by the youngest members of the household. You picture the wooden churn, the rhythmic thump of the plunger, the beads of sweat on the churner's brow as they worked to coax butter from stubborn cream. You take a slow breath, trying to let the heaviness settle. The cook's helper brings out another pot, this one filled with a pale, creamy sauce, thickened with, you guessed it, more butter. You take a small taste, feeling the slick texture on your tongue and the way it seems to coat everything in a warm, fatty hug. It's not just a taste, it's a whole medieval philosophy. Fat is life. Fat is fuel. Fat is survival. And though your gut's begging for mercy, you can't help but admire the resourcefulness it took to make sure every scrap of animal was put to good use. You pause for a small, weary joke. In medieval times, butter was practically a food group, and tonight, you're pretty sure it's staging a one-man show in your stomach. The fire crackles, the air thick with the scent of roasted meat and buttery bread. Outside, the wind moans through the cracks in the walls. But in here, the world is warm and heavy, the flavors of fat and smoke binding you to this ancient table. You take one last bite of bread slick with butter, one last sip of the suet-laced broth. Your gut's making ominous noises, but your heart's steady, you're tasting history, one greasy, slippery bite at a time. You push away the last crumbs of stale bread, but your journey through medieval food is far from over. Next up is a parade of foul and spongy pastriessa combination that sounds better in theory than in the smoky, humid air of this kitchen. A roast duck arrives, glossy with a thin sheen of fat that glimmers in the firelight. The cook slices it with practiced skill, though the skin is a touch leathery and the meat within is more gray than pink. Historians still argue whether medieval roasting techniques preserved the tenderness of the meat or just left it a tough chew for desperate teeth. You're about to find out, your stomach already clenching at the thought. A fringe tidbit for tonight. In medieval times, it was common to stuff birds with a paste of breadcrumbs and dried fruit, a combination that was meant to add sweetness and stave off spoilage. You're offered a slice of this stuffing, sweet and sticky, and you chew slowly, the flavors of raisins and old bread mingling in a way that's interesting, if not exactly delicious. The duck's meat is gamey, almost musky, and you're sure it's been hanging a little too long. Medieval kitchens didn't have refrigeration, after all, just cool cellars and luck. You chew, each bite a smoky, chewy dance that's equal parts survival and stubbornness. Next up is the egg, a soft boiled curiosity served in a cracked shell, the yolk runny and the white just barely set. You wince at the sulfurous scent that wafts up as you tip it back. In medieval times, eggs were both prized and suspect precious protein, but a magnet for spoilage, if left too long in the hearth's warmth. You chase it down with a swallow of ale, the sour tang of the brew a welcome relief from the rich, almost rank taste of the duck. Around you, the kitchen clatters with knives and pots, the constant hum of medieval life as everyone tries to make the most of whatever food they have. The final plate tonight is a pastry of those spongy medieval marvels. The crust thick and chewy, stuffed with a mystery filling that's half sweet, half savory. You take a cautious bite, your teeth sinking into the dense dough, the filling a soft, lumpy blend of what might be meat and what might be dried apples. The line between dessert and dinner is blurred here, and your gut is starting to realize it doesn't really care either way, it just wants a break. The pastry is warm, the steam rising as you chew, but there's a faint sourness to the crust, a sign that the cooked sourdough starter is alive and well, or maybe a sign that it's a little too alive. You're reminded that even pastries, those rare medieval treats, carry the risk of turning on you if you didn't eat them fast enough. You pause, a small, weary joke in your head. Medieval pastries, because nothing says culinary adventure like bread that might fight back. You glance around the table, seeing the cooks and servers tuck in with familiar ease. This is their daily Ferrero fussy sauces or fancy flours, just a constant churn of tough meat, suspect eggs, and thick, chewy crusts. You're just along for the ride, your gut a reluctant passenger on this medieval roller coaster. The fire pops, sending a shower of sparks up the chimney, and you let out a slow breath, feeling the weight of everything you've eaten settle in your belly. The duck, the egg, the breadits, all a dense, heavy march of flavors that your modern gut isn't sure it's ready to face. But you push on, because in the Middle Ages, there was no pause button. You ate what was in front of you, or you went hungry, and for all its faults, there's a comfort in the simplicity. A meal was a meal, no matter how rough around the edges. You take one last bite of the pastry, the sweet sour taste, a final challenge for your taste buds. Your gut lets out a quiet grumble, and you know the real battle is still ahead, the long, uneasy truce you'll have to broker with your digestion as it wrestles with centuries-old culinary traditions. For now, you lean back, letting the warmth of the fire soothe the churn of your belly. You're still here, still chewing, still finding your way through the thick, sticky world of medieval feast zone bite at a time. You lean back from the heavy pastries, your belly a cauldron of half-digested pulses, pungent cheese, and roasted meats. But the medieval feast doesn't rest, and neither can you, because next up is the sour ale. The cook plunks down a fresh tankard in front of you, the liquid within dark and slightly cloudy. You brace yourself for the first sip, already knowing this isn't the crisp pint of craft beer you're used to. Medieval ale is a wild thing brewed in small batches, each one a surprise in the dark wooden casks it was stored in. Historians still argue whether medieval brewing was an art or a desperate gamble. Tonight, as the sour tang of the ale hits your tongue, you're leaning firmly toward desperate gamble. The ale is warm, thick, and sharp, with a faintly metallic aftertaste that clings to the back of your throat. You sip again, the bubbles low and lazy, more of a faint hiss than a frothy head. There's no real fizz here. This is a living brew, raw and rough, a far cry from the ice-cold lagers and IPAs of today. A fringe tidbit for you: some medieval brewers believed that singing to the ale as it fermented would make it taste better. You hum a half-hearted tune under your breath, more out of superstition than hope, as you take another careful swallow. The ale is surprisingly filling a meal in itself, thick with grains that never fully settled. You can taste the barley, the faint sweetness of malt, and the sour bite of wild yeast that turned the whole thing into a medieval gut bomb. You pause, a small, grim joke. Medieval ale, because sometimes even your drink wants to fight your stomach. You glance around the hall, seeing the other diners swigging ale like it's the last drink on earth. For them, it's not just a meal, it's a lifeline. Water is too risky. Filled with invisible dangers from every creek and well, ale, at least, is boiled and fermented, and that makes it the safest thing in the room. You take another sip, letting the sourness bloom on your tongue. It's a taste that grows on you, if only because you have no other choice. The warmth of the drink seeps into your chest, and you can almost imagine how comforting it must have been on long, cold nights when the fire burned low and the wind howled outside the walls. But for all its warmth, your gut isn't sure it's ready for the challenge. The ale's living tang seems to churn in your belly, mingling with the fats and pulses and smoke of the night's feast. You can feel Eat a Medieval fermentation experiment bubbling away in your stomach, ready to unleash its own brand of alchemy by morning. You take another sip, trying to focus on the faint caramel sweetness beneath the sour. You think of the medieval alewives, those women who brewed in small wooden tubs in their smoky kitchens, their lives a constant swirl of yeast and barley. The ale you're drinking tonight is a tribute to their stubborn art of drink that's alive, unpredictable, and essential. The cook passes by, grinning as he tops off your cup. "Drink deep," he says. "It'll warm your bones." You nod, though your gut's not convinced. But in a world where the next meal isn't guaranteed, you drink deep, because that's what survival demands. You let the ale settle in your mouth, the sourness biting but somehow satisfying in its honesty. There's no pretense Hereno hops for fancy aroma, no cold filtration for crisp finish, just barley, water, yeast, and a gut-level need for something safe to drink. The hall grows louder as the cups clink and the fire crackles. The jesters juggling again, a blur of movement and clattering bells, and you let yourself smile, if only for a moment. The ale might be sour, the food might be questionable, but in this smoky, flickering world, there's a rough comfort to be found in the simple act of sharing a drink. You take a final sip, the sour tang settling in your chest like a challenge. Your gut growls, but your heart's warm, and for tonight, that's enough. After all, the medieval feast is far from over, and there's no telling what other gut-busting surprises the cook has in store. You set down the sour ale with a quiet sigh, but the night's medieval feast keeps marching on. This time, it's the kingdom of salt and spicia world where these tiny, powerful grains were worth their weight in gold, and sometimes more. The cook brings out a small bowl of coarse salt, its crystals glinting in the firelight like tiny diamonds. In this world, salt isn't just seasoning, it's life insurance. It keeps your food from rotting, stretches the seasons, and if you're lucky enough to have it, it's a mark of status and power. Historians still argue whether salt was truly scarce in the medieval world or simply hoarded by the rich to keep the poor in line. But tonight, as you run a fingertip over the sharp, white crystals, you're reminded of how precious it really is. You take a small pinch, sprinkle it over a slab of cold meat, and taste the burst of flavor that comes alive on your tongue. In a world of bland gruels and stale bread, salt is a revelation sharp, clean, and so important it built empires. A fringe tidbit for tonight. Some medieval markets had salt police officials who made sure no one was watering down the salt with ground chalk or sand. Imagine being so desperate for salt that you'd settle for the gritty fake stuff. But salt alone isn't enough to mask the medieval stench of questionable meat. That's where the spice trade comes, in a world of exotic wonders shipped from far-off lands, each one more precious than the last. You're offered a small plate of spiced roast meat, the air above it rich with the scents of cinnamon, cloves, and black pepper. You take a cautious bite. The flavor is intensely sweet and spicy, hot and earthy all at once. It's like your tongue's been set alight. And your gut, well, your gut's too busy worrying about tomorrow to care about the fire in your mouth tonight. The cook leans over, whispering conspiratorially about the wars fought for these spices, how kings and merchants risked everything to bring back even a pinch. You nod, chewing slowly, feeling the way the cloves bite and the cinnamon warms. It's a luxury, a rare treasure, and you're tasting it like it might be the last good thing you'll ever eat. You pause, a small, wry joke in your mind. In the Middle Ages, a pinch of pepper could buy you a cow tonight. It's just buying you another bellyache. The air in the hall is heavy with these scents, and you realize that in medieval kitchens, spices did more than flavor food, they hid the whiff of spoilage that even salt couldn't tame. You swallow, your tongue tingling, and try not to think too hard about what the spices might be covering up. The cook brings out another dish, a small pie laced with nutmeg and ginger, its crust golden and flaky. You take a bite, the warm spices mingling with the sweetness of dried fruit, and the faint tang of old butter. It's delicious, in a way that feels almost modern, but your gut's still playing medieval roulette with every mouthful. You lean back, letting the spices settle, and glance around the hall. For the nobles at the high table, this is just another indulgence of spices so rare and expensive that they're almost a display of wealth more than taste. For you, it's a fleeting moment of flavor, a bright note in the heavy, smoky world of medieval eating. You take another bite, feeling the warmth of the spices bloom in your chest. There's something comforting in it, something that feels like it could chase away the damp cold of the night, even if just for a moment. The fire crackles, the cook's helper bustling past with a new pot of pottage, and you can already smell the difference. This one's spiked with pepper, the scent dancing in the smoky air. You know, it'll be another challenge for your gut, but you're here for the journey. Every bite a step deeper into the world of medieval flavors. You finish the last mouthful of spiced meat, your stomach groaning in quiet protest, and wipe your mouth with the rough linen of your sleeve. In this world, salt and spice aren't just condiments. They're survival, they're status. They're a tiny spark of joy in the endless winter of medieval life. You take a deep breath, feeling the warmth of the fire and the spices in your chest. You're not done yet. There's still more medieval magic and mayhem on the menu tonight. But for now, you let the sharp bite of pepper and the sweet warmth of cinnamon settle in your gut, a quiet testament to the fierce trade and fierce taste of the Middle Ages. The last bite of the spice pie still lingers on your tongue, but you don't have long to savor it. A new dish is sliding onto your trencher, and it's a challenge even for your medieval-sized appetite, fishy business, and holy fasting. You stare down at a platter of dried cod, pale and flaking, rehydrated in a broth so salty it could double as seawater. Medieval fasting days meant no meat, but fish was fair game if you could stomach it. Historians still argue whether these fast days were truly about faith or simply a convenient excuse to stretch the larder. But tonight, as you take a cautious bite of the cod, you're not really thinking about church doctrines. The fish is tough and chewy, each mouthful a salty struggle. You chew and chew, feeling it break apart into soft shreds that taste more like the ocean floor than any fresh catch. You wonder how many days this cod spent hanging in a smoky loft, drying in the cold air until it was more plank than fillet. A fringe tidbit for you. Medieval monks believed that eating eels on fast days would cleanse the suland, the body, in ways you'd probably rather not think about. Lucky you, tonight's fishy offering doesn't seem to have any eels wriggling in the pot, but the thought alone is enough to make your gut clench. You chase the salty cod with a sip of ale, the sour tang almost a relief compared to the briny punch of the fish. The cook's helper brings out a small plate of pickled herring next, each silvery strip swimming in a sharp, vinegary bath. You steel yourself and take a bite, the sourness cutting through the salt, but not quite taming it. Around you, the hall is quieter now, fish. Nights aren't feasting nights, and everyone's hunched over their bowls, chewing in silent endurance. You wonder how many medieval bellies churned like yours on nights like this, filled with salt and smoke and the constant knowledge that tomorrow's meal might be even leaner. The cook points to a pot of fish stew bubbling by the hearth, thin and watery, a faint fishy scent rising with the steam. You ladle out a small portion, the broth hot and bracing, and swallow it down. It's thin but warming, and for a moment, you can almost understand how even this meager meal was a comfort on cold, empty nights. You pause, a small, weary joke flickering in your mind. In medieval times, the fish fast might have saved your soul, but it sure didn't do your stomach any favors. You glance around the table at the hollow-eyed diners, their faces tired but determined. For the poor, fasting days were just another way to stretch a small food store a little longer. For the rich, it was a chance to show off lavish fish pies, sweet sauces to mask the tang of preservation, and spices to trick the senses into thinking it was a feast. Tonight, you're stuck somewhere in between your trencher loaded with a plain piece of dried cod and a small, slightly shriveled turnip for good measure. You chew slowly, feeling the salt sting your tongue, and try to remember that in a world without refrigeration, fish was both a blessing and a gamble. The hall grows chillier as the fire dies low, the smoke curling in the rafters above. You huddle closer to the warmth, trying not to think about how your gut's going to feel in the morning after a meal of salt and brine and cold fish. The cook's helper ladles out another portion, but you wave it away, your belly already tight and uneasy. You're learning the hard way that medieval fasting might have been good for the soul, but it was murder on the digestion. You take a final, cautious bite of the pickled herring, the sourness making your mouth pucker. Around you, the hall is silent, but for the crackle of the dying fire and the soft clink of wooden spoons against rough bowls, you lean back, feeling the salt settle deep in your chest, and wonder how much longer your gut can hold out against this medieval marathon. For tonight, you're still here, still chewing, still braving the fishy world of medieval fasting one briny bite at a time. And though your gut might be plotting revenge, your heart's determined to taste it all, no matter how salty the journey. You push the empty bowl of pickled herring away, your stomach making small, uneasy protests, but there's no pause for pity in the medieval kitchen. Tonight, it's time to explore the gardens of unease, the strange, and often suspect world of medieval vegetables. The cook brings out a basket of root vegetables, each one covered in dirt that clings like a second skin. Carrots, parsnips, turnips, these aren't the bright, clean bundles you'd find at a modern farmer's market. They're lumpy, misshapen, and somehow more honest for it. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants got enough fresh vegetables or whether their diets were a slow march to malnutrition. But tonight, as you scrub at a turnip with the back of your knife, you're just hoping it's more friend than foe. The first bite is earthy, sweet, in a way that only root vegetables can be, but there's also a faint bitterness that clings to the back of your throat. The cook tells you it's the way they were grown: cold soil, short days, a lifetime of struggle that seeps into every bite. A fringe tidbit for tonight. Medieval gardeners sometimes used a mix of sheep's urine and crushed snails to fertilize their plots. You try not to think about it too much as you take another bite of turnip, the earthy taste suddenly more complex than you'd like. The next course is a stew of greenscale, cabbage, and something that might be sorrel. It's boiled until it's soft as wet paper, and the smell is somewhere between garden and compost heap. You take a cautious spoonful, the bitterness of the greens blooming on your tongue like a stubborn weed. The cook grins, telling you how these greens are good for the humors, and you nod along, even if you're not sure your gut agrees. You chew slowly, feeling the fibrous texture fight your teeth, and wonder how much of this was meant to be medicine as much as food. You pause, a small weary joke. In medieval times, your dinner might have doubled as your doctor's prescription eat your greens, or risk the wrath of the village herbalist. You glance around the table, watching the other diners push their greens around with wooden spoons, each of them resigned to this nightly ritual. In the lean months, these boiled greens were a life linea, bit of color and bite in a world that was often all shades of brown. The talk turned to the garden itself, a small patch of land outside the hall, where the cook's helper pulls weeds by moonlight in hopes the rabbits stay away. You picture it. Rows of twisted carrots and stunted onions, a world where every leaf matters and every bite is a fight for survival. The cook ladles out another portion of the green stew, and you take it with a tired smile. Your gut's already had enough, but you're here to taste it all, even if it means another bite of this earthy, bitter brew. The hall is quieter tonight, the laughter softer, as everyone tucks into the greens. Outside, the wind rattles the shutters, and you're grateful for the warmth of the fire. Even if the taste of boiled cabbage is a challenge, you're not sure you're winning. The cook's helper brings out a small dish of pickled beets, their sharp, sweet tang a welcome break from the bitter greens. You take a cautious bite, the vinegar biting at your tongue and washing away some of the heaviness of the kale. It's a small mercy, a bright note in a meal that's more struggle than celebration. You lean back, feeling the greens settle in your gut with the rest of the night's parade of medieval experiments. Your stomach grumbles in warning, but you're determined to see this through. After all, the medieval diet was never about comfort, it was about making do, about coaxing life from cold, hard soil. You take one last bite of the stew, the bitter, briny taste grounding you in the moment. The world outside might be dark and cold, but here, in this smoky hall, the garden's stubborn harvest is enough to keep you going one earthy, uneasy bite at a time. You set down your spoon, the last traces of green bitterness lingering on your tongue. The cook, never one to let the feast slow down, has a new offering to tempt you. Sweet lies and sugar plums, medieval style. A plate of candied fruits appears, their bright colors glistening in the low firelight preserved, cherries, thin slices of quince, and even a few pieces of candied ginger. They're a burst of color in the smoky gloom, and for a moment, you let yourself believe this might be the treat your stomach's been begging for. Historians still argue whether sugar was an everyday luxury or a rare, almost mythical ingredient in medieval kitchens. What's certain tonight is that these sweet morsels are as precious as gold and likely just as hard on your digestion. You take a bite of the candied quince, the syrupy sweetness flooding your mouth in a way that almost makes you forget about the sour ale and the sour turnips. It's a bright, sunny flavor in a world that's mostly cold and gray. A fringe tidbit for you. Medieval cooks believed that sugar wasn't just a treat, it was medicine, thought to warm the body and even lift the spirit. You can see the logic in that, even if your modern gut is already bracing for the sugar crash to come. The cook's helper brings out a small bowl of honeycomb, dripping with golden sweetness. You tear off a piece, the waxy texture sticky and rich, and chew slowly, feeling the warm honey coat your teeth and tongue. It's a treat beyond measure, but your gut's not quite as convinced. You take another bite, the honey clinging to your lips as the fire crackles and the jester tumbles by in the background. The sugar's a comfort, a moment of light in the long medieval night, but it's also a reminder that even the sweet things here come with a price. You pause for a small wry joke. In medieval times, sugar was a cure for melancholy tonight. It's more likely to cure you of any illusions you had about medieval dental hygiene. The cook leans in, sharing how sugar was imported at great expense, traveling over mountains and seas, changing hands 100 times before it landed in your wooden bowl. You taste that history in every baitilla sticky, shimmering thread tying you to distant lands and long-ago markets. The next dish is a sweetmeat small spongy balls of ground almonds and sugar, known as marchpane in the fancier halls. You pop one in your mouth, the flavor rich and nutty, and for a moment you're transported. This is a taste that feels almost modern, almost familiar, but your gut's quick to remind you that even these sweetmeats carry the weight of centuries-old preservation methods and suspect hygiene. The talk around the table turns to how these sweets were once only for the wealthy, a sign of status as much as a treat. You chew thoughtfully, the sweetness melting on your tongue, and wonder how many medieval bellies paid the price for a few fleeting bites of sugar. You take another piece of candied ginger, the fiery sweetness cutting through the rich heaviness of the meal. It's a relief, a bright note, in a world of earthy, heavy flavors, but you're keenly aware that it's just a brief reprieve. The fire pops, sending a bright flare of sparks into the smoky air, and you lean back, letting the sugar settle. Your gut's already plotting its next protest, but your mouth is still chasing that sweet, golden flavor, the brief illusion that something in this meal might actually be gentle on you. You glance around, the halothers are tucking in eagerly, eyes bright as they share the rare luxury of sugar. The laughter is softer, almost reverent, as the cook passes around another plate of sweetmeats, each one more precious than the last. You take one last bite of honeycomb, the warmth of it lingering even as you swallow. Your gut's already churning at the mix of sugar and salt, but your heart's light for a moment. This is a taste of a world long gone, a world where every sweet bite was a stolen moment of joy in the endless march of survival. For tonight, that's enough. One sticky, sweet bite at a time, you're tasting the bright spark of medieval decadence, however fleeting it might be. You let the last hint of honey fade from your tongue, but there's no pause in the medieval feast. The cook's helper appears with a jug of something pale and frothy, and you brace yourself as you hear the words, almond milk and medieval smoothies. You're handed a cup, the liquid within slightly gritty with a nutty, earthy aroma. This isn't the sweet, creamy almond milk of your modern fridge. This is medieval survival in a cup. Historians still argue whether almond milk was truly a daily staple or a rare luxury, but tonight, it's yours to sip and judge. You take a cautious sip. It's mild and faintly sweet, the texture more like watery porridge than milk. The cook tells you it's made by grinding almonds to a paste and soaking them in warm water, no modern blenders, no smooth consistency, just hours of patient pounding and straining. A French tidbit for you. In medieval kitchens, almond milk was often used during fast days when dairy was forbidden. An early plant-based alternative that would make a vegan's heart sing, though your gut might have other opinions. You take another sip, feeling the slight grit of ground almonds on your tongue. It's strangely comforting, if a bit, well, lumpy. The cook ladles out a thicker version, something like a medieval smoothie, with ground almonds, stale bread, and a sprinkle of sweet spices all whirled together in a wooden bowl. You brace yourself as you swallow a spoonful. It's thick and warm, the bread giving it a chewy heft that clings to your throat. It's not exactly the silky smooth drink you might hope for, but in a world of sour ale and suspect water, it's a small mercy. You pause, a small, half-hearted joke. Medieval smoothies, because sometimes you just have to chew your drink to prove you're alive. You glance around the table, watching others drink deeply. In a world where milk could turn on you in a heartbeat, almond milk was a safe, bet no risk of curdling, no sour stink in the summer heat. It was a quiet luxury, a subtle nod to ingenuity in a time when every bite was a battle. The cook's helper brings out another jug, this one flecked with bits of fresh herbs parsley, maybe a hint of mint. The flavor is brighter, sharper, a green note that cuts through the nutty warmth. You take a slow sip, feeling the herbs settle in your chest like a sigh of relief. The talk around the table turns to the almond merchant traders who brave storms and deserts to bring these precious nuts to your wooden bowl. You imagine the long caravans and dusty markets, the quiet luxury of a drink that traveled 1,000 miles to end up in your gut tonight. You take another sip of the herbal almond milk, feeling the weight of the medieval world in every gritty mouthful. Your stomach's already complaining, but there's a strange comfort here, a meal that's light and nourishing in a world that rarely gave either. The cook ladles out another bowl, this one with a swirl of honey for sweetness. You sip it slowly, the honey catching in your throat as the almond milk soothes and coats. It's a taste of quiet, luxury, a fleeting moment of gentleness in the rough, smoky hall. The jester passes by, juggling apples and winking as you sip your medieval smoothie. You smile, even as your gut grumbles at the mix of pulses, fat, and almonds. Because here, in this world of smoky hearths and heavy stews, this almond milk is a soft notea brief, silky hush in the endless noise of survival. You take one last sip, the earthy, nutty taste settling on your tongue. The fire crackles low, and you lean back, letting the warmth of the drink and the flicker of the flames soothe you for just a moment. Your gut might be ready to riot, but tonight, you're determined to taste every note of this medieval songon, gritty, gentle mouthful at a time. You wipe a smear of almond milk from your lips, but there's no time to linger, because the cook's already preparing something new. Culinary cures and kitchen alchemy, the medieval answer to every ache and ailment your gut's feeling right now. A small, battered mortar sits on the table, filled with crushed herbs and a swirl of something sharp and pungent. The cook's helper grinds steadily, the rhythmic scrape of pestle on stone blending with the soft crackle of the hearth fire. You watch, equal parts intrigued and wary. Historians still argue whether these medieval kitchen cures were real medicine or just a hopeful guess in a world without real answers. But tonight, as you sip a spoonful of something green and suspicious, you're starting to see how necessity turned the kitchen into a laboratory. A fringe tidbit for you. Medieval cooks often doubled as the family's first doctor if you were lucky. They knew their herbs as well as their cuts of meat. If you weren't, well, let's hope you had a strong stomach. You take a cautious taste of the green brew, the bitterness blooming on your tongue like a fresh weed in spring. It's a mix of sage, mint, and a sharp vinegar bite that seems to wake up every nerve in your mouth. You're told it's good for the digestion, though your gut's not entirely convinced. The cook explains how this potion is meant to balance the humors, those four mysterious fluids medieval folk believed ruled your health and mood. You nod, even as you swallow another spoonful and feel the warmth spread through your chest, the vinegar cutting through the sour and the fat of the night's feast. You pause, a small, wry joke in your head. Medieval digestion where vinegar is the answer to everything, except maybe the taste. You glance around the table, seeing others sip similar brews. their faces a mix of hope and resignation. In this world, there's no doctor's office, just the kitchen's endless experiments, where every herb is both dinner and cure, every meal a delicate balance between nourishment and medicine. The cook brings out another concoction, this one a thick, sticky syrup made of honey and mustard seeds. You dip your spoon in, the sweetness clinging to your lips, the mustard seeds popping with a faint heat that clears your sinuses. It's meant to soothe the throat and warm the belly, a medieval lozenge for cold nights and smoky halls. The flavors are intense, the sweetness almost cloying, but you take another sip, feeling the warmth chase away some of the weight in your gut. The cook's helper laughs, telling you how these syrups were often made in small batches, stored in jars that might last a season or two if the mice didn't get to them first. The talk around the table turns to kitchen alchemy, how medieval cooks tested and tasted, searching for the perfect blend of flavors that might also stave off the next bout of plague or fever. You think of the thick manuscripts, the dusty pages filled with herbal lore, the quiet determination of cooks who knew that a handful of sage could mean the difference between life and death. You take a final sip of the green potion, the bitter tang settling in your belly like a quiet promise. Outside, the wind howls through the cracks in the walls, and you're grateful for the soft glow of the fire and the warm, earthy bite of herbs in your mouth. You lean back, your stomach a slow churn of pulses, fat, fish, and now this kitchen cure. You're not sure it'll work, but there's a quiet comfort in the ritual, in the way each sip ties you to centuries of hopeful experiments and quiet faith. The jester passes by, pausing to wink as he snatches a spoonful of the syrup, smacking his lips theatrically. You smile despite the heaviness in your gut because here, in this smoky, flickering world, even the strange bitterness of these medieval cures feels like a small miracle. You take one last sip, the taste of vinegar and sage clinging to your tongue, and let it settle deep in your chest. The night's still young, and there are more mysteries in the medieval kitchen to taste. But for now, you're learning that even the bitterest brew can be a balmone, careful, hopeful, spoonful at a time. You wipe the last traces of the syrup from your lips, your belly a swirling cauldron of medieval mysteries. But there's no break yet, because tonight, the cook's laying out a spread that's as much about the spirit as the stomach. Food for the faithful. A hush falls over the hall as the cook's helper brings out a dish of humble pottage, thick with lentils and greens, meant for the lean days of fasting. You take a spoonful, the familiar earthy taste blooming on your tongue. It's not glamorous, but it's a quiet comfort, a small reminder that in the Middle Ages, faith and food were always tangled together. Historians still argue whether the endless cycle of fasting and feasting was more about control than devotion. But tonight, as you watch the cook mutter a quiet prayer over the pot, you can see how these rituals bound people together, even if the food left your gut in quiet agony. A fringe tidbit for you. On some holy days, even eggs and butter were banned from the table, replaced by almond milk and fish to keep the body in line with the soul's hunger. You take a careful sip of the broth, feeling the quiet weight of these old traditions settle around you. The cook passes you a bowl of humble gruel, thin and pale, meant to break the night's fast in the soft light of dawn prayers. You chew slowly, each bite a small act of devotion, even if your stomach's more focused on surviving the night's rich, smoky stews. You pause, a small wry joke, medieval fasting, because if the prayers didn't save your soul, the endless fish might at least test your faith in your gut's resilience. The air in the hall is different tonight, quieter, softer. There's no loud laughter, no clink of ale cups, just the soft murmur of prayers and the steady scrape of wooden spoons against rough bowls. You watch the cook's helper ladle out more of the thin broth, the steam curling in the air like incense. The talk around the table turns to feast day show, the same kitchen that tonight churns out humble pottage would on a feast day, fill the hall with rich meats, golden pies, and mountains of spiced bread. It's a world of stark contrastlian days and lavish nights, each one a reflection of the rhythms of faith and fortune. You take another bite of the gruel, your stomach grateful for the break from the heavy, spiced meats of earlier. It's gentle, almost sweet in its simplicity, a soft note in the endless medieval song of survival. The cook's helper brings out a small bowl of dried fruit, a nod to the sweetness of celebration, even in the quiet of fasting. You take a piece, the wrinkled skin of a fig bursting with a soft, sugary tang that feels like a small luxury in this world of lean meals. The jester passes by, balancing a wooden cross on his head, and you smile despite the heaviness in your gut, because here, in this smoky, flickering world, even the smallest bite can feel like a feast if it's shared in faith. You take a final sip of the thin broth, the warmth of it soothing your battered belly. The cook leans over, telling you how every meal in the medieval world was a pray-reach bite, a way to honor the balance between body and soul, even if it left your gut more than a little confused. Outside, the wind howls, but in here, the air is calm and warm. The quiet comfort of the pottage, a gentle balm for the night's excesses. You lean back, letting the weight of the old prayers and the soft light of the fire settle around you. Your stomach might be tired, but your spirit feels steadier for a momentone small bite of humble pottage at a time, one breath of quiet faith to carry you through the long medieval night. You finish the last quiet bite of the fasting meal, your gut sighing in relief for the moment. But the medieval kitchen never truly sleeps, and as the fire crackles low, the cook's already bustling about, setting the scene for the chaos of market mayhem and street snacks. You're led outside into the cold night air, the cobbled streets of the market crowded with wooden stalls and flickering torches. Here, in the tangle of voices and haggling, you find the other half of medieval eating, the rough and ready world of street food, each bite a test of courage and constitution. Historians still argue whether these bustling markets were more a plague hazard than a blessing. But tonight, the scent of roasting meat and the sizzle of hot oil is enough to make your stomach growl, even after everything it's been through. The first stall you pass hawks, meat, pies thick, heavy crust filled with, well, the less you think about it, the better. You take a cautious bite, the pastry dense and greasy, the filling a warm, meaty mush that clings to your tongue. You're not sure if it's mutton, goat, or something else entirely, but in the flickering torchlight, it's better not to ask. A fringe tidbit for tonight. Some street vendors in medieval times were fined for stretching their meat pies with ground bones, sawdust, or even old breadcrumbs. You chew carefully, your teeth testing every bite for surprises. The next stall is selling hot fritters bits of batter fried in bubbling animal fat, the air around them thick with a rich, smoky scent. You take one, the crisp crust shattering in your mouth, the inside soft and almost sweet. Your gut, already a battlefield, braces for impact. You pause for a small, weary joke, medieval street food, because why let your gut rest when you can deep fry everything? The market is alive with noise and motion vendors shouting over one another, children darting between stalls, dogs nosing at dropped crumbs. You're jostled from every side, your wooden cup of ale sloshing dangerously as you duck past a man selling fresh oysters that smell more like low tide than dinner. The cook's helper pulls you along to a stall selling pottage by the ladle thick, lumpy, and smoky. You take a small taste, the flavor earthy and a little sour, and remind yourself that in the Middle Ages, this was comfort food, a hot meal to fill your belly before another long night. You wander further, your gut already protesting the greasy, smoky mess you're layering on top of the night's earlier feast. But there's something alive here, something that feels more real and immediate than the careful feasts in the hall. This is food that's fast and fleeting, eaten with one hand while the other clutches your cloak against the cold. The jester's here too, juggling apples and slipping scraps of fried dough to the market dogs. He grins at you, winking as he tosses a piece of sausage, your why little mystery link that tastes of garlic and smoke and a hint of something unidentifiable. You chew cautiously, your gut sighing in protest, even as your mouth savors the sharp bite of pepper. You glance around at the other diners' merchants with dirt under their fingernails, laborers with empty bellies and quick hands. In the glow of the torches, everyone's the same, just another hungry soul trying to fill their gut, no matter what tomorrow might bring. You take one last bite of the sausage, the spices lingering on your tongue as you lean against the rough stone wall of a building. The noise and the smoke swirl around you, and you're suddenly struck by the raw, wild energy of it all the way. Every bite here feels like a risk and a celebration in equal measure. Your gut might be on its last legs, but your spirit's caught up in the laughter and the clatter of the market. You take a deep breath, the scent of fried dough and smoky meat thick in your lungs, and let the noise and the chaos wash over you. In this moment, you're part of something bigger part of the endless, messy dance of medieval life, one greasy, glorious bite at a time. You wipe your mouth on the back of your sleeve, your gut rumbling a quiet warning, but there's no turning back now. The cook's helper gestures for you to follow him back inside, past the crowded market and into the dimly lit kitchen once more. This time, you're stepping up to the hearth itself, a medieval heart of fire and smoke, where everything is cooked over the open flames. You take a moment to soak it in. The soot-stained walls, the iron pots hanging from blackened hooks, the embers glowing like small suns beneath the thick logs. Cooking over the hearth was both an art and a daily Rizno timers. No safety measures, just the primal dance of wood and flame. Historians still argue whether medieval cooks truly mastered the hearth or simply learned to accept a little char with every meal. But tonight, as you watch the cook carefully tend a bubbling pot, you see the quiet rhythm in it. This was survival, not perfection. The first bite you're offered is a small chunk of roasted meat, charred on the outside, pink and smoky in the center. It tastes of the fire-rich and earthy, a little bitter from the soot, but deeply satisfying in a way that only food cooked in open flames can be. A fringe tidbit for you. Some medieval cooks believed that the smoke from a hearth could ward off evil spirits. You're not sure about spirits, but the smoke certainly seems to be haunting your clothes and your hair. You take another bite of the meat, the chewiness of it grounding you in the moment. This isn't the delicate, perfectly seared steak of a modern kitchen. This is rough, primal, and deeply real. You can feel the crackle of the flames in every mouthful, the way the smoke seems to cling to your tongue. The cook's helper stirs a pot of pottage, the wooden spoon scraping the bottom in slow, deliberate circles. The scent of root vegetables and scraps of smoked pork fills the air, a thick, hearty perfume that seems to settle in your bones. You take a spoonful, the heat of it almost scalding, and let the flavors roll over your tongue, sweet, smoky, and somehow both fresh and ancient. You pause. A small, wry joke flickering through your mind. Medieval cooking. Because who needs an oven when you have a live fire to keep you guessing? You glance around the kitchen, seeing the quiet ballet of cooks and scullions. There's no recipe here. No written guide, just a learned instinct of years spent turning raw food into something that could keep you alive through another long winter. The jester slips in, his face smudged with soot, and snatches a piece of bread toasted black at the edges. He grins as he crunches it between his teeth, the char adding a bitter edge that somehow works. You can't help but smile, even as your gut braces for the challenge of yet another medieval experiment. The cook leans over the pot, adding a pinch of salt and a fistful of dried herbs. The scent lifts in the smoky air, a soft green note that cuts through the heaviness of the meat and the smoke. You take another sip of the pottage, feeling the warmth spread down into your chest, even as your gut rumbles its quiet protest. The kitchen grows warmer as the fire roars brighter, the shadows dancing on the stone walls. You lean back, letting the heat wash over you, and for a moment, you're just another hungry soul in a medieval world where the hearth was the center of everything: heat, light, and the quiet promise of one more meal. You take one last bite of the charred meat, the smoky tang settling on your tongue, and lean back, feeling the rough stone of the kitchen at your back. Your gut might be in open rebellion, but your heart steady, you're tasting history, one smoky, fire-kissed mouthful at a time. The fire crackles low now, the warmth a steady hum against your skin as you take one last sip of smoky pottage. You're nearly done with this medieval feast, but there's one more test for your gut. The final feast, the final stretch, the last echoes of a world that would have broken most modern stomachs. The cook brings out a final platter of pie with a thick, golden crust that shimmers in the firelight. Its filling a mystery of sweet and savory smells. You take a cautious bite, the pastry dense and buttery, the filling rich with bits of dried fruit and fatty pork, a curious marriage of the sweet and the smoky. Historians still argue whether these final feasts were a celebration or a punishment for the belly tonight. You're not sure there's much difference. Each bite is a triumph and a test, a farewell to a world of rough survival and fierce flavor. A fringe tidbit for you: some medieval pies were so dense and so large that they'd last for days, even weeks, if the rats didn't find them first. You chew slowly, the thought of those long, cold nights with a pie for comfort flickering through your mind like the glow of the hearth. You pause. A small, gentle joke. Medieval final feasts. Because if you're going to go out, you might as well go out stuffed. You lean back, feeling every mouthful settle deep and slow, the echoes of smoke and salt and sweet fruit ringing in your chest. The hall is quiet now, the laughter low and tired, the music, a soft hum that lingers like a prayer in the air. The cook's helper hands you a final cup of ale thin and sour, but familiar now, a last toast to this long, winding journey. You sip it slowly, letting the warm tang settle you, your belly and mind both heavy with the weight of the meal. The jester sits cross-legged by the fire, juggling apples with a tired grin, and you smile back, your gut too full to protest, your spirit too quiet to resist. Outside, the wind sighs in the darkness, and you feel the hush of the world pressing in around you, a gentle cloak of sleep and old magic. The cook murmurs about tomorrow's meal, more pottage, more bread, maybe a fresh catch, if the river's kind. But tonight, you're done. You've tasted the world of medieval kitchens, the moldy bread, the sour ale, the pickled fish, the smoky roasts, and the sweet, sticky promises of honey and spice. Your guts paid the price, but your mind's full of the rich, tangled world of a time long past. And now, as the fire crackles low and your body sighs in relief, it's time to ease back. Let the weight of the feast drift away, the echoes of the market, and the jester's laughter fading to a soft, warm hum. Your gut's still grumbling, but your heart is still, the night a blanket of quiet comfort as you slip into a gentle, dreamless sleep. The fire's glow fades, the air grows cooler, and the last scraps of medieval feast settle deep in your belly. You let your eyes drift closed, the soft hiss of the dying embers a gentle rhythm to guide you down into the quiet. The weight of every bite, every smoky note, and sweet tang begins to blur in your memory, just warm echoes in the hush of the night. You breathe slowly, each inhale filling your chest with the faint perfume of burnt wood and old herbs. Each exhale lets go of the heaviness, the jumble of textures and tastes that now rest in the quiet of your belly. You feel your shoulders ease, your thoughts slow, the gentle fatigue of the night's journey washing over you in slow, warm waves. The cook's voice, the jester's laughter, the clink of wooden cups, they're all soft now, soft as the hush of the winter wind outside the shuttered windows. In this final breath, the medieval world slips away like a dream. The echoes of the passed-off moldy bread and crackling fires, of sweetmeats and sour ale become a gentle melody, fading into the soft night. You're safe here, warm and still. The memory of each flavor, a quiet promise that history is never truly lost, it just waits to be tasted again, in slow, sleepy mouthfuls. And now, as the last embers fade and your breathing slows, let the hush of the medieval world carry you into dream soft, warm, and far away from the rumbles of your brave, tired belly. End of script. Sweet dreams.